Will you stop complaining and just quit? That's the fantastic advice from a corner of higher education today. Not just administrators, but faculty who say they're tired of hearing about adjuncts complaining about their low pay and their exploitation. Yeah, just quit already. Get over yourselves and find a real job.
If that's what it means to be a Wonderbolt, then I don't want any part of it.
What are you saying, newbie?
I quit.
Admittedly, that's harsh advice, especially from your peers in higher education. But you have to admit, don't we, that we're reaching a point of diminishing returns when we invest so much of our life and energy and money into getting a graduate degree, trying to develop teaching skills, a classroom presence, trying to learn how to do the teaching of higher education, only to have no one reward us, and finally we have to say, maybe it's time they're right. Maybe it's time that we just quit.
Maybe you want to give it a rest and try again tomorrow.
No, I quit.
When does it pay to stick it out? And when does it just hurt to stick around? When do we reach that point when we say, maybe it's better I find another job? Well, tap the like button and let's look at what's going on today with adjuncting in higher education. Hello, I'm James Callahan, and this is The Do-Over Show, and I have over 20 years of experience in higher education. First as an adjunct, then as a full-time tenure-track person, and then, yes, back as an adjunct, and then as a consultant after I went over to the dark side, helping administrators try to make sense of higher education today. And yes, we have a problem with adjuncts. Not the adjuncts necessarily, but, well, maybe. 50% of the faculty at most colleges and universities in the U.S. are temporary adjunct faculty, and over 70% of the courses that are taught today are taught by adjuncts. Yes, there are full-time adjuncts. It's a small percentage, not the majority, that teach 2, 3, or 4 courses at 2, 3, or 4 schools in an area, and they try to cobble together a life, often depending on a partner or support from someone else. But they still can't break through and get that coveted tenure-track job, that full-time, multi-year contract job that will give them a chance to move and to develop their skills as an adjunct, move from the world of temp work, not certain what the next 3 months are going to look like, to a world in which they can actually devote themselves time and energy to research and increasing their teaching abilities. But things aren't changing anytime soon from at least the top down, and that is with 10 applicants, Ph.D. applicants for each open tenure-track job advertised today. Trustees and administrators know it's their market when they get hundreds of PhDs applying for that one opening. And yes, the world itself of adjuncting is ripe for exploitation. And yes, adjuncts have agreed to it. So finally, someone is suggesting the obvious. Maybe it's time that y'all just quit.
It made me start believing there was something better for me out there. So I quit.
That is, rather than trying to change the problem, let's just go with blaming the victims. You're agreeing to be exploited. You complain about it, we all hear that. But why do you keep agreeing to be taken advantage of? Aren't you smart enough, PhD, MA, aren't you smart enough to know that you alone, for all your complaining, are not going to change the climate, the economics of higher education today?
I am about to utter 2 words a Harvard man never says.
I'm cool? No, I'm sorry. You can't set me up like that. Don't quit.
I quit!
So before we get into trying to address what should be changed in higher education, let's see what has changed recently. Here's an interesting trend. Among STEM researchers, the average years of research that STEM faculty did in universities was close to 35 years, where they would devote themselves to working with the school, and cohort after cohort of grad students would come and study with them in order to pursue a research project that was usually publicly funded. But that has changed. In a few years, it will be as low as 5 years for the average STEM researcher at a university in the United States. That is, they work for a while, get some short-term money, get a cohort of students, grad students that come there to study that with them, and then they either give up or they quit, or their research money runs out and therefore their position no longer exists, so they move to the private sector, where private sector investment in research is now being taken in-house. 35, 40 years ago, it was done through public funding, federal funding, state funding at universities and grant programs. But private sector, they want to give money now and they want to control the process and the patent and the work product. So it's really a no-brainer. So in response to some of these changes, there's a growing chorus in higher education recommending to those who are just starting off in their career or getting into their teaching career that the easiest way to get into a full-time job is to demonstrate that you can actually do the work of teaching. That is, to be an adjunct. But here's the difference. They say you need to set a time limit. You need to invest in yourself for up to 5 years where you do study, research, you publish. You don't just tweet and complain about things, but you actually publish in peer-reviewed journals or even a monograph in your field, depending on your field. And you demonstrate that you can do the work, that you can fake it until you make it to a tenure-track job. But you set a time limit. Beyond that 5 years of developing and investing in yourself and your publishing, your networking, yes, and your teaching ability, beyond that 5 years, you become a chronic adjunctor. That sounds like an incurable disease. And in higher education, that's what they're saying. The longer you adjunct without receiving a full-time appointment to a tenure-track job, the more you look like a damaged product to higher education. That is, the delay in hiring you, in placing yourself in a situation, and your ability to adapt to make yourself a viable, valuable candidate in higher education today demonstrates that no one else wants to take a chance on you either. You are damaged goods. That is, permanent full-time adjuncts are considered hanger-oners. That is, they're not worth an investment or development because chronic adjuncting hasn't adapted. That is, as a chronic adjunctor, you haven't adapted to the changing circumstances. And schools need you to demonstrate that you are able to adapt to their criteria of what is necessary to teach today, not some romantic idea from 50 years ago. Lingering in this role of a chronic adjunctor not only shows a lack of adaptability, but it also breeds an air of, well, desperation that they can smell with every cover letter and CV you send to all those open positions when you're rage applying to everything that's available, even close to your field. Yeah, you become someone who they just put at the bottom of the pile. And yes, there are 50% fewer tenure-track jobs in U.S. higher educational institutions today than there were 50 years ago. But there are more students. So where do they put the students? Yes, they put some in larger classes, but they also take advantage of temp or adjunct instructors to take care of their increased student enrollment. And I'll admit it, I was actually hired for my first tenure-track role when I started as an adjunct. I started as an adjunct, one course. They had an opening the next year because they had a sudden retirement from a professor. So they said, hey, would you like to be a visiting professor full-time for 1 year? And I said, great. And then they advertised the job as a tenure-track job during my full-time year. And I applied and I was interviewed along with 3 other candidates. And I was given the tenure-track job that I held for 5 years and worked my way through the early process of tenure. So I can't say it doesn't happen, but it happens so rarely that I would be the unicorn today. And here's something that's really embarrassing for higher education. Even when colleges and universities have tenure-track openings that they advertise, they probably have an idea of who they already want to hire. They may have done an informal interview. They've made arrangements or even talked to the school where they are now. And yet they go through the exercise of advertising, national search. They get hundreds of applications when all the while they've already got their candidate picked. This happened recently when the University of Notre Dame published a tenure-track position along with the title of the tenure-track position with the name of the person that they wanted to fill the role. And they paid to have it published throughout the United States. Now, in response to that, a number of friends in higher education said, you know what, that happens all the time. It's just we're smart enough not to include the person's name. That is, it may be, and I've seen this myself, not as an adjunct, because you don't get to see that part of higher education. Only when you go to the dark side of consulting, when you see they will not advertise a job for a tenure track unless they have a likely candidate in mind that will improve either their funding or the quality of education, their reputation, because this person is a stellar scholar or a famous author, and they want to add this person. And then they will advertise a position. And oops, look, this famous person just so happened to apply and became available. Next, we have to admit that tenured full-time faculty are not the adjunct's best friends. They're not advocating for you. None of them are giving up one of their roles. They're not retiring early. They're extending their retirement. None of them are advocating for your increase in pay in a way that would impact their pay. They may feel sorry for you as an adjunct, but they're not giving up an inch of the ground that they are trying to hang on to themselves as post-tenure review erodes the roles and the number of people who have tenure track jobs today. Oh, and all the while they're complaining that all of those adjuncts, 70%, are lowering the standard of education at their institutions. And oh, it's just a terrible thing that's happening. But you know what they're doing? They're taking advantage of all of those adjuncts so that they can have their sabbaticals, they can have their smaller class size, they can teach their advanced courses in their major field and let you teach the large Coliseum-like classes or all those required courses that they just can't be bothered with. And this has led to where we started, that is the drastic solution to the problem of adjuncts, and that is, why don't you all just quit? One observer in higher education, inside higher education, said this: why won't anyone say the obvious? No one should work as an adjunct. If people refused this labor and did something else with their PhDs, which, according to studies done by professional associations, is more than viable, institutions would be forced to adjust their hiring practices. That is, dreamers like this say, if we all just agree to quit, schools will be forced to change. And that's a lie. One of the other suggestions made is that maybe grad schools need to become more responsible and they need to throttle the number of PhD students that they accept and they graduate annually. That is, these for the non-fellowship schools, that is the schools that accept people, especially professional schools, that accept people who pay for their graduate education rather than receive fellowships and grants worth $500,000 over the course of 4 or 5 years. Yes, what if all those grad schools that are getting all that free money just do the right thing and stop accepting and graduating so many PhDs? Yep. We're asking them to give up free money like that's going to happen. Oh, and by the way, if they did that, what would that do to the number of faculty they need for their schools to operate today? It would actually reduce the number of faculty positions necessary to function as a grad school. That is not going to happen. That's like shooting yourself in your own dang foot. And what about you? You're starting off. What do you think of that advice that you should give yourself a limit of 5 years, that you invest in yourself with networking, publishing, improving your teaching, and after that time you say, all right, I'm done. Time's up. I couldn't make it happen. I need to adjust. I need to use my transferable skills. That phrase, transferable skills, that's your future. In today's workplace environment, one of the most valuable capacities you have is that when you can take something from your graduate degree program and turn it into a real-life skill set that moves from your discipline to 1 or 2 or 3 other disciplines outside of higher education in the private sector or public sector, that is in the nonprofit world, in government. When you can take what you've learned and transfer those skills, those capacities with your PhD, you have a higher ability that's greater than a college grad. That is, more than 60% of people who adjunct today actually have real full-time jobs. They teach because they have to for their requirements for their job. Maybe they're part of recruiting for their firm, their organization. Happens all the time in accounting and business. Happens all the time in professional schools, law schools, where adjunct professors are ordinarily functioning within the world. That is, they are lawyering, and yet they teach in higher education, in law schools. And some of them do it because they want to, because they love teaching. Others do it for the money as a gig. And moonlighting, they just want a little extra money to supplement their full-time job. But that's the majority of people that adjunct. They really do have real jobs and real-world experience. And they're able to live in both worlds, transferable skills. But after you give it a go early in your career, you invest in yourself, your networking, your scholarship, and your teaching. And if it doesn't work out, you have 3 options. One is that you just give up the idea of a full-time job and you do your best to live in poverty or on public assistance, and you try to cobble together in a regional area with multiple schools, universities, colleges, a full-time adjunct life. The second option is to quit and use those transferable skills in the private sector in order to make a living, maybe dabbling as an adjunct, but giving up on the idea of adjuncting full-time. Or the third option is move. Yes, move. There are places in the world without a surplus of PhDs. There are places in the world that would love to have you teach and give you a full-time tenure-track job in that obscure, otherworldly place that you've never even seen on a map. When I was a grad student in my Ph.D. program, I'd received my master's degree, I was given an invitation by a school in the suburbs of Sydney, Australia, to teach for a one-year appointment. They needed help with accreditation. They needed somebody with a master's degree from a research university, and they needed somebody who could teach. I took a risk. My partner and I, we moved there, lived there for a year. I taught, had a wonderful time. They passed their accreditation test. The school was accredited, and they said, hey, you want to stick around? Now, we're from the upper Midwest with family. We had a young family, growing family. We said, you know what? Just can't make the move to the other side of the world, another hemisphere. Even though today, to this day, we still have some of our closest friends live in Australia and travel here and visit with them routinely and social media, and we connect with each other almost daily. We just couldn't bring ourselves to make that move, that shift to Australia. But after refusing a full-time opportunity every year during my grad school into my early career from that school that I taught at, a friend of mine was completing a Ph.D. and couldn't find work. And I said to this person, hey, I know a school that's hiring. More than 20 years later, my friend is still full-time tenure track at the school in Sydney, Australia. Yep, there are places in the world where if you're willing to move, people are willing to employ you full-time permanently with your graduate degree, your experience, and your love of teaching. Moving might be an option. So it's time to ask yourself, is it time to leave adjunct teaching? Or have you invested enough, seriously, enough in yourself, in your scholarship, in your networking, in your publishing? Have you done enough to show that you're adaptable and that you can become a value add to a college or university that will be hiring for a tenure track position? Are you going to quit? Are you frustrated? Don't let that frustration get in the way of doing what it is you love to do. To teach, to research, to interact with students, to be part of changing lives and changing their futures, to enjoy what it's like to be part of higher education, its best part, that is the things that actually change life and make our world a better place. Ask yourself if you've invested enough in that opportunity. Ask yourself if it's time for you to move on and change your expectations. And please, let me know in the comments below what's going on in your life with your role, with your work in higher education and your adjuncting. And thanks for being part of the Do-Over Show. Please, while you're commenting, could you tap the like button because it really helps. And while you're down there, how about you subscribe and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next episode. I'm so glad you found me and I found you. Thanks.